out to seek views of residents in the local area, to get that feedback, to assess it, to analyse it, and then to take any recommendations forward in terms of what we might do from that, then I expect that would be around a 4 to 6 month period that would take to undertake that review process, and then to report that through. Could changes come arising from that? Yes, potentially. It would be subject to the outcome of the feedback that we've received. If we're seeking to take forward some amendments, then we would have to take that through a further traffic regulation order process, which again would have a formal statutory consultation, and we would obviously, as part of that process, need to identify and include it in our programme of works. Now, we could do some pre-planning for that. If the review is next year, we could set aside some funding with our programme for next year to cover off that review process. In terms of the ability to do the review earlier, yes, we could do that review earlier. I think 12 months is normal practice for controlled parking. Usually, there is a bedding in period for any scheme. Parking schemes are no different, but we could look to bring that forward from 12 months to an earlier date.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for the question there, Councillor Shaw. Councillor Auckland, I believe you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. The actual orders that are in place, somebody mentioned that they're about to expire, one of the public questioners. I just wonder where we are for time. Were we minded to ask for yet more refinement? Also, in the case of a review, I don't know what our record is on reviewing these and whether we do actually get them done in 12 months or whether in fact it's 18 months. It's a little bit on Councillor Shaw's question about how quickly could we review it, because I think the displacement issue should become apparent fairly quickly. Why charge? That often comes up. Why are we charging and somewhere like York gives you a permit for free, or other cities can do it for nothing, and we're in the category of charging? Somebody, because I've had some emails, I think we all have, from people on Glencoe Road, and they're asking a question about the Sheffield City Council on-street parking places prohibition order 2022, which I think must refer to existing restrictions are in place. So I don't know if you've seen that, whether it ties in at any way with this one. I was going through the consultation response. I mean, if looking at how tightly this area is drawn, if I was on the edge of this area, I'd certainly want to be in. And we've done these schemes for a long time. I've put some of them in the way in distant future and supported them, but on the edge of them would be a problem. But the actual consultation, so taking Glencoe Road, it was like 38 objections and 9 in favour. Basically, it was a landslide against the scheme. And of course, we've had the presentation, though, that if you live on these roads, you haven't got off-street parking. I just wonder if you could unpick that part of it as we're meant to be listening. That's it, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Auckland. Lisa and Tom, are you able to help?
Yeah, I'll take the first two. So the first one about timing out on the traffic regulation order. From the date of advertisement, which was the 10th of March 2022, you have 2 years, and that is for you to make the order. So everything to be physically on site, the order to be made, the enforcement to start, the legal bit done and dusted, if you like. So because of where we are today, no detailed design has been done, paint display machines have a really long lead-in time, getting physical works mobilised, ordered. If a decision's not made today to go forward, we will be timed out on the traffic regulation order, because March the 10th next year will come around really quickly. And what that means is we'd have to go through the whole process again of advertising the traffic regulation order again, reporting objections again, and we end up in a constant cycle if we don't make a decision today to not time out on that traffic regulation order. So I hope that makes that idea a little bit more clear for you. In terms of the review, I've been in regular contact with Dorothy, who spoke today, and I do absolutely have sympathy with her, because she is literally on the edge of the boundary that we are proposing. As I mentioned in my introduction, that was purely based on demand that came back from our parking surveys. So on Dorothy's street specifically, the parking survey showed that there were still 60% of spaces available at the time the parking surveys were done. So, you know, there's not a demand for parking. Residents should be able to park on their road at the time those parking surveys were done, which was October 2022. And we do appreciate that since then, you know, the pressures of parking might have increased again as people are starting to come back to the office. And this is why, as part of the report, we've put in the recommendation that we will do a review to capture any of this extra capacity that's filled the area again.
Thank you, Lisa. Tom, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just comment in on some of the other points, Councillor Auckland. In terms of price and charging for the cost of a permit, the cost of a permit is the same for all of our controlled parking zones. We introduce a charge because of the ongoing administration and enforcement associated with the zone. So there are costs associated with that, and those are met from the permit charges that are placed. There are increased charges for second permits, and that is a policy decision that is there to try and influence people around the issues about multiple car ownership. So those costs are set and established and are applied in all of our controlled parking areas, and would be applied to this scheme as well. There isn't an alternative budget that would fund that cost, so that is why there is a cost to the user. And obviously some people in the area may not own vehicles. It is only if you need that demand on street. In terms of Glencoe Road, I'm not too sure in terms of the kind of issues that are kind of around the order that you referenced, but in terms of, you know, this issue around people that are at the edge of the zone and why people on a certain street may not want it, then there'll probably be multiple factors in terms of people's decision to respond in the way they do. Clearly, Lisa's touched on some of those issues around the parking capacity in those streets, and you know, that will be part of it as well.
Thank you, Tom and Lisa. I believe that Councillor Sanger also indicated to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lisa and Tom, for the report. I just want to go back to this issue about subsequent consultation. So the council received this petition in June of 2,000 signatures. So there clearly had been consultation before that, and that's what's included in this report. This report has then been due at this committee twice, and twice we have deferred it for periods of 3 months plus. So, you know, we were meant to be taking this decision this time last year, and we've deferred it a year. And irrespective of what the legislation requires us to do, surely councillors had intimated that a further round of consultation was expected. And has that not happened? And clearly this is a much smaller area, and I get the point that legally you don't have to go out to further consultation, but isn't that what members had asked you to do?
Tom, can you help us answer that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. That isn't the position, Councillor Sanger, in terms of either briefings through the committee or otherwise, in terms of members' position on this.
Okay, just to pursue that. So, as I understand this, and you know, this report was due here a year ago. It has been deferred because the two co-chairs wanted more time to consult ward colleagues. And I think that's an absolutely reasonable thing for the chair to ask of the committee, and that's certainly why I supported the co-chairs in that position. We expected the ward councillors and the officers involved to carry out other consultation because the scheme was going to change. And clearly the scheme that you have brought to us today is very different to the scheme you would have brought last June, July. It's much, much smaller in scope, and different roads are affected in different ways, and that's what we've heard from the questions. So doesn't that mean that we should have at least, the public would have expected a level of consultation to at least understand what was going on during that period, so why we've had a year of this waiting for this report to come here?
Tom and Lisa, can you help us with that supplementary?
So, I'm not. If you could be more specific on your question, Councillor Sanger, it might assist.
I think what I'm trying to say, Chair, is that this has been deferred by the committee and by the four of us, the two co-chairs, the vice-chair and the spokesperson, so that officers could go back to ward members, and so those ward members could consult with transport officers about what further interaction with the public in the general sense, now we've got a toolkit, could be carried out given that the proposed area was going to be smaller. And has that not happened over the last 11 months? Because at least 3 of the questions and several of the emails we've received in the last week suggest that there has not been much public consultation in the last 11 months.
Thank you. So you're right, there have been a number of discussions between officers and members through the committee, briefings on this issue. Officers have set out the proposed scheme through those discussions and the intention to bring a report to committee on that basis. And we have not had any instructions to undertake further consultation across the area that we originally undertook consultation on.
Thank you, Tom, for clarifying that. I think it's probably important to remind members that we will be moving into a second phase of this particular item shortly, where we will be able to make points about the recommendations before us and the scheme more broadly. This area is specifically about kind of technical points for officers. Councillor Diamond, I believe that you wanted to make a contribution.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you very much for the report. I think it was very interesting and set out the arguments why we should have a scheme like this very clearly. I just wanted to come back, because I read the reports of objections from the original consultation, and there was, I think, was it Mr. Bergin said that 88% of respondents wanted no scheme, but that wasn't the sense that I got from reading it. I just wanted to know if you think that was accurate. And also, my other question, I think you've answered partially on why the Glencoe Road and some of the other terraced housing wasn't included. But would it be possible for us to, as members, decide to include the areas in this map now? And would you have an opinion on that? And would your recommendation still be the same in light of what we've heard in terms of accepting the scheme as it is overall? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Diamond. Lisa and Tom, are you able to help Councillor Diamond with that particular question?
Thank you. It is clear that we have had a large amount of objections. I'm not sure percentage-wise exactly whether the 88 is accurate or not. I can certainly go away and crunch the numbers. But we have had... so we've had 1,088 responses, 183 support and 905 objections. That was through our Citizen Space created survey. We've also had various emails into our inbox. We've had letters as well, which are also captured in the report. And sometimes you get people who don't comment at all, and they might be just happy to let the scheme go ahead. You tend to only hear from people who generally have a really strong opinion either way. So it's hard to know how the other sort of 2,000 properties in the area feel about the scheme. In terms of...
It was just, the claim was that they wanted no scheme at all. But, yeah, so that was the the question.
I think it's fair to say that, you know, within people that have objected and including those people that have supported, there are other comments that are made, including from people that do support the scheme but don't want to pay. So there's clearly an identified problem or need for action, but they don't want to have to pay for the resolution of that problem. Now, we've explained why, you know, there is a charge that does come with these schemes, and why we feel that the area that we've now proposed the scheme to cover does have an identified issue around non-local residential parking, so commuters coming into that area. And for us to be able to influence those choices of those people that are driving literally just into the edge of the city centre, just to the other side of Sheffield Midland Station, and within a very short walk of the city, then controlled parking is one of the ways in which we do that. Yes, we've mentioned that there's pay and display parking that will be available, but our parking strategy, our adopted parking strategy, has a policy again that will influence through charge. So the cost, it provides flexibility for people that do live in that area. They may have a number of visitors, or they may have somebody with a specific trade, an electrician or, you know, a builder that wants to park close to their property. Yes, visitor permits are available, but sometimes they're not the most convenient. So there is a range and a flex. Instead of having certain locations just for residents, certain locations just for pay and display, what we're proposing through our parking strategy, our adopted policy position, is to have a mixed use provision in parking in the schemes that we've consulted on. Sorry, Councillor, the second part of your question was...
So the second part of the question, could we amend the current proposal now in this meeting to include the roads that you see on the map there, if we wanted to, and would you have an opinion on doing that?
So I might look towards Robert's position on this, but clearly the recommendation in the report is that it's for the area that we've got covered. We think, having looked at the responses to the consultation and the data that we've got from some of those parking surveys that Lisa's mentioned, that yes, there might be some risks around displacement, but we think that the core scheme that we're proposing now is required and it will have benefit, and that the review of the scheme after it's been implemented, subject to bring that forward from 12 months, then there is an opportunity there for us to look again to see whether those concerns around displacement have been realised, and if they have, to what extent, or if they haven't, you know, to get those wider views from residents in the area about the running of the scheme.
So in that case, we'd be able to widen the scheme to include those areas if there was that significant problem with displacement. However, the alternative option, if we reject the scheme, the TRO will run out, we'll be back to the drawing board, you have to start everything all over again, which, I mean, to my mind, goes completely against the strategy of Sheffield City Council, and, you know, any action we want to take to tackle dangerous parking and air pollution and you know, commuter parking, match day parking, all of that. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Diamond. Could I just ask Robert, as Assistant Director of Legal and Governance, to just provide a little bit of a steer for us on that particular point that was raised by Councillor Diamond?
Thank you, Chair. So, well, procedurally, what you're mapping out there is a proposal to change the recommendation effectively to describe the controlled parking zone in wider terms. Now, whether or not that can be technically proposed, but I think I would look to Tom as a professional officer to say whether, in his professional opinion, that was supported by the work and the analysis that had gone into the report, so that it would constitute a reasonable decision, i.e. it's properly informed and that the impacts are fully understood. The proposal before you in the officer's presentation is understood, its impacts are mapped. The alternative, as described, I would look, Chair, back to the officer to advise you whether that alternative is similarly understood and its impacts mapped.
Thank you, Robert. That's very useful. Could I just ask Tom just to give his reflections on that?
Thank you, Chair. So I think we have we've already outlined in terms of the rationale for why the scheme is the size that it is. You know, the costs of an extended zone, you know, so will change. The kind of the case for that investment will need to be considered. We understand the kind of issues around the data from an on-street parking perspective, but at this point, you know, we wouldn't be able to say to you fully, if you chose to do a scheme that included, you know, 4 additional roads in the area in yellow on that plan, the costs then become this, the issues then become that. So at this point, we would need to consider that in more detail.
So from taking the advice of Robert as Assistant Director of Legal and Governance and also Tom there, it does seem that we don't necessarily have enough information at this stage to be able to propose that change in recommendation when we come to that second part of the meeting. So I guess members would have to be mindful of that when they were casting their vote on the recommendations. On my list, I also have Councillor Gamble-Pugh as well. I also have Councillor Richards, but I think that's for the second part where we can actually discuss the recommendations. Councillor Gamble-Pugh.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just got a question about the climate impact assessment and what, if any, data or evidence or work there has been to assess what the difference in the contribution to us tackling the climate emergency this revised scheme has in comparison to the previous scheme, which was turned down. And secondly, further to that, I wondered whether there was data to back up the assertions that are made in the climate impact assessment on relating to the scheme. In particular, whether there's been any analysis as to how the implementation of this scheme or not would contribute to or have an impact on our climate budget.
Thank you, Councillor Gamble-Pugh. Tom and Lisa, are you able to assist us with that question on the climate impact assessment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. In terms of the, I'm sure you are familiar with the assessment tool that we have. So the assessment is essentially a desktop exercise. It is a broad assessment of the relative kind of merits and contribution towards reduction in CO2 within the city. There isn't a quantified assessment part of that toolkit, although that is something that has been considered for future development. So in terms of the assessment, it is that broad assessment about the kind of relative contributions that the scheme would make, or any scheme would make, that is going through the climate impact appraisal assessment toolkit. In terms of tackling kind of commuter parking, we believe that this scheme will have a positive effect in terms of addressing some of that. Clearly, in terms of the current situation, the parking in many of the streets is quite significant. People are squeezing in wherever they can, and it is not in a controlled manner that the parking scheme proposed will introduce the signs, the lines and the controls, and those are required in order to have an enforceable scheme, and the charges that are applied for anybody wishing to park within that area will have an implication in terms of people's everyday choice. That may mean that they continue to park and pay, but through that daily charge we would expect that will have an influence in terms of whether they do choose to travel by a different mode. A number of the people coming in from that side of the city, choosing to park in that side of the city, may well be driving past tram stops on the way in because they know they can park for free just behind the station. instead of considering some of those other choices that may be more difficult at the start of their journey, or take more consideration at the start of their journey, to walk to a tram stop, instead of not having that consideration, just jumping in the car. So these schemes do have a positive effect, that the overall car parking capacity in the area will reduce, therefore the numbers of vehicles parking in that area will reduce, and the charge should influence the kind of mode choice decision that people will take.
Thank you very much, Tom and Lisa, for your contributions there, and for everyone who was able to ask a question of officers. That therefore moves us into the second part of this particular item, which is about the recommendations before us, which are on page 70 of our agenda pack. This is an opportunity for members to discuss the way forward and the recommendations. I did see Councillor Richards indicate a short while ago, I know you had a contribution presumably about the recommendations or the substantive item in front of us.
I do indeed. I think it's interesting that I get to be a sub here when this item comes up. I want to go back to when members first wanted to look at having a parking scheme in this area, and it was because we had had lots of requests and phone calls. In fact, I remember that Councillor Fox had some rather nasty messages left on his answer machine from people saying, what are you going to do? This is overcrowded. This is a really difficult place to live and park. And, you know, we had the story, which I suspect is an urban myth, because so many people told it to me, that we had people who would come and park for 2 weeks and go off on their holidays and come back having left their car parked for free in the area. And that was, you know, there were lots of people who felt that we needed to sort out parking. So we did speak to Tom and his officers and said, we think there's demand for a scheme. And at the time, I think as councillors, we thought it would be a smaller scheme, because we knew that the people who were talking and asking about this were in Dorothy's yellow bit of her map, and that was what we were looking at, and also Norfolk Road. And then when we talked to officers, they talked to us about displacement and what happens if you have a small scheme that all you're doing is moving parking people further out, and that the reason for having a bigger scheme was to make sure that people weren't hit by having people just moving, not parking in Glencoe, but moving up to Donington or another area. And we thought that sounded quite logical, and so we said, yes, that sounds sensible to us. I think when that went out, people who weren't currently affected by parking issues felt that they would become affected by them, and didn't see why something that happened in a different place should have to affect them who lived much further away. And that was what they spoke about. They also spoke about having to pay to park outside your house, although clearly if you have more than one car, then you won't ever be able to park everything outside your house. But it all got very unhappy, is the best way to describe it, with people, the majority, as we have said, being very clear they did not want a parking scheme. And even when we looked at the smaller parking scheme, we still had people saying, we just don't want any scheme at all, because we don't think that this is going to work in this area, and people just said no, they don't want it, as we saw from the figures. If we did take in, as Alexi has proposed, the what is the yellow bit on the map, that would definitely displace people further up into Donington and the other roads up there, which is not acceptable to those people. I take up completely what Graham said about the consultation, and at the moment, and indeed following what came out of Lowcock, as you have rightly said, Graham, we have lessons to learn about consultation, and there is a paper about better ways of consultation being worked on at the moment, which will eventually go to S&R committee, and I think that will have clear lessons for us. So when officers have rightly said that we didn't need to consult anymore, that was the letter of the law, but you're right, there should have been consultation, and I will hold my hands up about that, Graham. I think also, and I will say this, was that Anne was the person of the three of us who was looking at this and had indeed pulled it and said, hang on, this new scheme doesn't fit right either. And then we said, let's postpone while we have a think about that. And as you know, Anne died and stuff slipped and got lost. And again, that's a responsibility of me and indeed of Councillor Fox. I think basically we come back to what Dorothy has said, which is that lots of people think we need a scheme. The schemes that we have so far aren't right for enough people to support. So that's why I would say we can't support either of the schemes, both the huge one that was rejected, and also again on this. I hate to say it because I need to apologise to some extent to officers, but also to the public, that we are going to have to go back and look at this again, and that as time has run out, I think we have to say, knock this on the head and just start again in a very small discussion group way. And I'm still not convinced we will get any sort of consensus or enough support from people to be able to make it a scheme that will work, because so many people don't want to have their particular part affected by it. On the question of parking permits, I had originally thought that parking permits would be the way it would go forward, with those being resident only, as has been suggested by members of the public here. And then I found out that we had a new policy, which is the one that Tom has reiterated, which is that it would also have meters with it. It wouldn't just be residents only. That was an older iteration of the way we did parking permits and residence parking schemes, and the new one now has parking meters, and that has also been something that local people clearly haven't wanted to have. And also the scheme doesn't actually cover match day parking because it is a weekday scheme. So it's been flawed twice, flawed with an A, not a double O. And I think, judging by the mood and the feeling of all local residents, we have to stop this and start again. And I'm loath to say that because I know that a lot of effort has been put in by officers and indeed by members of the public and indeed by your local councillors to try to find a way through this. But at the moment, I don't think that that is possible. and I'm therefore going to suggest that we have to turn down this scheme and start again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Richards, for your honesty, frankness and sincerity in that contribution. Councillor Diamond, I think you're next on my list.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I'd also like to apologise to officers for all the work that they've put in, doing the consultation, making changes based on the respondent, and then again, having to see all that work go to waste. And also listening to the overall strategy of the council, in which we've said that we want to take action on the climate emergency. We said we want to tackle air pollution. We said we wanted to tackle dangerous parking. But it seems like we're just going to throw that out the window now, unfortunately. Yeah, I'd just like to say that we are in a climate emergency. We do need a modal shift. Parking schemes like this are part of that. We do have the option to see how this beds in and have a review. We could even bring forward a review to see if some of the objections, those problems do actually come to pass. But to do that, we would need to accept these recommendations and go forward. There's been a huge growth in the number of cars since 1990. I think they've almost doubled the amount of cars. Like, where is it going to end? There's not space on the roads for these cars, and that is why we need to do something about this. It's also a road safety issue. We have a huge problem in Sheffield. We've got some of the most dangerous roads of any core city, with almost double the number of children under 15 being seriously injured or killed on our roads compared to other core cities. And one of the reasons for this is because of illegal parking, obstructive parking, pavement parking, and measures like this can tackle that sort of issue. I think that in this sort of consultation, the responses that you'll necessarily get back are from motorists. However, a lot of the population in this area are not actually motorists. So if you look at the 2021 census, Parkhill, if you look at Parkhill, 55.5% of households don't have a car or a van, but they are impacted by people coming to their area to park, to pollute the area, to obstruct the pavement. I mean, it's an equalities issue with people with disabilities, people with young children, they're not being able to go down the pavement, having to go into the streets, just one of the issues. So I think members should also consider that parking doesn't just affect motorists. Should also consider that other areas that have previously rejected schemes have gone on to regret that decision. For example, Hunter's Bar. I would say that a lot of the objections to the original consultation were actually contradictory, saying different objections, but for different reasons that were contradictory. And we should pay attention to officers who do have expertise in this area, and actually listen. I think it's absolutely clear that pay and display is a deterrent to parking. So the reason that people are coming to park in this area is because it's close to the city centre, they can park for free and just walk in. But is that really fair on residents? I would say no. I think that £46 is an incredibly low amount to pay for the privilege of taking up so much road space. I just think I could be very disappointed if we do reject this proposal and then go back to square one. I don't know where that would leave us in terms of our commitment to taking action, and I think we're ignoring the best interests of some of the most disadvantaged residents in our city. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Diamond. Councillor Sanger.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks again to the officers for all the work they've done on this over the past 18 months. I'm really pleased we're talking about parking schemes again, because we spent a lot of time between 1996 and 2011 talking about parking schemes, and they were very painful. I remember going through the Broomhill ones, I remember the Groves ones, I remember, as Councillor Diamond said, the Sharrow Vale and Hunter's Bar schemes, and it always ended up that some people were in favour of them and some people were against, and they were always difficult. And the areas that didn't have residential parking schemes said they wanted that, those of us who represent areas who didn't have ones, residents always came to us saying this was a solution, and I've always cautioned them that maybe when you see a parking scheme, it might not be quite what you want, so be careful what you wish for. I'm really pleased that the council policy from 2011 to 2019 has been got rid of, and I'm really pleased that we've got officers talking again about parking schemes. But parking schemes will always be difficult, and it will always be a balance. And we have to find a way of balancing the needs of the local residents with the needs of people who are coming in to the city for other purposes. And I'm quite happy to say that residential parking is a potential solution to deter people using residential streets to park. And I'm quite happy that that should not be a strategic decision, that having got a city-wide policy, that we need to listen and learn from the views of the locally elected councillors rather than those of us who are representing wards a long way away. Clearly, at all stages over the last year, the local ward members for this ward have had concerns about the scheme. We haven't found a way of translating that concern to officers in a clear manner, and I think that's something which we need to take up in other places. But as far as I'm concerned, we have got a scheme here. We had a big scheme that's been consulted on with a significant number of objections and concerns, and therefore officers have come back with a smaller scheme, and the smaller scheme seems to me to be equally as unpopular as the larger scheme. And I, in all conscience, having heard the views of a local ward councillor and having heard the views of local people, cannot find a way of voting for this scheme. I'll go back to my constituents and say, yes, keep talking about residential parking schemes. We might get to consult on one, but it might not be the scheme you want. And in this case, where we are now, TRC is making these decisions. I still think this could be an issue we could delegate, but I've heard what local people have said, I've heard what the local council said, and I will be voting against this scheme in its current form. And if that means we have to go back to the drawing board in this part of the city, then so be it. There are other parts of the city that are wanting to look at residential parking schemes, but I just warn them here and now that it will not be straightforward, and that however much you pay, whether it's £46 or whatever, you will not be guaranteed a parking space outside your home with a residential parking scheme, and it will not magically solve all the transport and highway problems of this city. So yes, thanks to the officers for doing this work. Really glad that we've got a policy of having parking schemes, but this is not the right one this time, so I will be voting against it, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanger, for eloquently outlining the challenges that we face in finding a pragmatic solution to this as a committee. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. You indicated at the start of the meeting how Labour members would be voting before. We'd even heard the report, had the opportunity to ask questions or hear the debate or responses from officers. I just want to assure members of the public, officers and other members, I've come to this debate with an open mind, having read the report beforehand with the objections and wanting to hear questions from the public and other members. Consultations aren't strictly referendums. I believe all issues raised should be considered individually and on their respective merits, not strictly based on the numbers. Consultations are, to find out if there's issues that haven't been considered, or indeed if there's any issue at all to be resolved. I'm sympathetic to those with concerns, from those with disabilities or carers, as I'm a carer myself. This committee, it's been said several times over the year, it needs to think long-term, strategically, and as you said, Chair, show leadership and take tough decisions. We've heard that this scheme forms part of a longer-term strategy, including other schemes such as St Vincent's at Kelham. And well, having read the report and heard the questions and responses from the officers, I have to say I am inclined to vote in favour of the scheme if there's a review as soon as possible. Within like the next, or hopefully started within the next 6 months, just in case there's other issues that are raised. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. One of the main reasons I wanted to speak today was to actually thank the people who've come in today, but not just for coming in today. For the benefit of the committee, these people and others who aren't here today have for a long time now come along to the East Local Area Committee meetings and expressed these very same concerns, and they've expressed them clearly, consistently, and they've been proved through the consultation to be representative of the community they come from. I think, we've had people talk about, well, we've got transport planning experts who can do this. Local people are experts in what will work in their area. And in my experience, you go out and do something to a community rather than doing it with a community, it will be a disaster. The people in this room and others have never said they don't want a scheme. These aren't a row of Jeremy Clarksons. These are people who recognise the impact on the environment, the impact of poor parking on pedestrians, on children. But there are people who want to see a solution to this, but it's become quite clear over a significant amount of time now that what's proposed here is not the solution. This is not going to work. Local people are telling us it's not going to work. They've spoken, and I think it's up to us to listen and just to reject this scheme today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Councillor Gilligan-Cubo.
Thank you, Chair. I've been listening to the debate today. I support a lot of what my colleague, Councillor Dunn, said. There are reasons why we need parking schemes, and I think the residents of Parkhill have said they need something doing about the parking because it is causing upset and disruption to their lives, and it does cause danger to pedestrians and things like that. So I'm not sure how we move forward with this. There has to be it seems that residents want some kind of scheme in the area, but we can't agree on what kind of scheme and how it will work. And I think I will echo again what the chair of this meeting said. Sometimes we have to take difficult decisions. It seems quite clear that the people at this committee are not going to vote through this scheme, and I'm wondering how the residents of Parkhill will feel now when they have to live with the congestion and the bad parking for another couple of years. So I wish we could have come to a solution that would work for people. I think the idea of reviewing the scheme after a year or even earlier than that was absolutely key, and that if we could pass it today and review it, I think that would probably be a way forward, because we would have accurate information about what worked and what didn't work, and we might be able to get a scheme that will actually benefit everybody in the area, which is what we all want to do in the long term. I just have a strange question here for clarification, Tom. If this is not working at weekends, and I think from reading it, is it just going to be like 9 till 6 or something? Is that the outcome of how it's going to be?
Councillor Gilligan-Cubo, I do welcome those technical questions to officers, and it's really important that we have them, but there was an opportunity to ask those at the start of the item. Is that okay if we leave that? I'm happy to let this one go. Tom, are you willing to answer that one first?
Yes, so it's a clarification on the times of the proposed scheme. So it was consulted on Monday to Friday, 8 AM till 6:30 PM.
Thank you, Tom.
That's what I thought. Therefore, why can't residents, they wouldn't need a permit if they didn't want to park between those times, would they? Just a thought.
Thank you. Those questions have been noted. Councillor Gamble-Pugh is our last contribution. Oh, and perhaps Councillor Auckland as well. I've just noted that.
But not least.
Thank you. So, I mean, it's very, very clear to me from the correspondence that we've had as members of the committee and from the representations that have been made that sadly the devil's in the detail on this, and there are local aspects that people are aware of by living with the problem day in, day out, that just haven't been able to be addressed in either of the permutations of the scheme that have come forward. I would like to think that if we get our processes right and push really hard this year at devolving these kind of local scheme decision making out to the LACs, local area committees, and the ward councillors, we can actually get a situation where right from the ground up the design can be put together in a way that does work. Christine said, you know, it's a shame we haven't been able to we hope we can find something that would work. I think the way of getting these things to work is by things being co-designed with communities. So I think we need to be making a commitment here today to be doing that in future, whilst also, of course, taking into consideration all of the really excellent points that Councillor Diamond made about the strategic significance of why we do need to be doing what we can to improve the lives of people living in communities and improve the climate impacts of commuting and reliance on car journeys. We don't want to be anti-car, but we do need to enable and encourage and support people to move away from reliance on car journeys where they possibly can. And we know this is these kind of schemes are one of the tools that we have in our armoury. And I was really interested, in terms of our role as a policy committee, I was really interested in the description of the policy of the city being to form this kind of donut around the perimeter of the city centre. It particularly struck me, possibly because I quite like donuts and I'm a bit hungry, but also because I think it's really, really important that we as a committee look at that kind of oversight and that overview. And maybe one way to do it is that the LACs and the residents need to be designing the schemes from the bottom up, while we at a committee level could do with maybe building into our work plan to have a look at strategically what the plan is for rolling this out and getting it right. I asked some questions about whether we've got data about the carbon reduction implications of this, and I think we all, I think, share the same hypothesis that this kind of scheme is a generally good thing to do in terms of reducing emissions and air pollution. But I wasn't sure that we quite got the level of reassurance that I was seeking in terms of the data. And so looking at the data across the city, how are we going to roll this out and get it right? But certainly, this illustrates to me the importance of consultation. We've seen what happens in this council when we don't get consultation right and we don't listen to people. I think it's very interesting that we've not had to go out to a new consultation on this scheme because of the legal, what we're obliged to do and what we're not obliged to do. Well, we saw some really appalling decisions being made in this council on the basis that legally we could do it. And now we're very, very sorry that we ever went down that line. So I think for all of the details that we've talked about with this individual scheme and the strategic oversight that is needed for us to have in this committee, but also for the wider issue of how we as elected members in this local authority relate to the citizens of the city, I think it's only right and proper that we say, unfortunately, no, on this occasion, we can't support this scheme, we draw a line under it, and we do things much, much better in future.
Thank you very much, Councillor Campbell-Pugh. Councillor Auckland, I believe you're the last contribution. Thank you.
Yeah, we often hear that phrase, don't we, in council, Chair, from colleagues, I wasn't going to speak, but everyone else has speak, because I wasn't going to speak, but I came in here minded to support the scheme as outlined, an early review, sooner than 12 months to get to the bottom of displacement. So I've genuinely been persuaded by the debate and contribution of local members and the public questions that we need to go back to the drawing board on this one and look again. I have learned over the years on transport schemes that getting, 50% in favour of something from the get-go is really hard. So bringing people on behind a proposal is hard work. But I think we should have learnt as a council, as Councillor Craig Gamble-Pugh has said, and as Councillor Baker has said, that actually it's far better for us to take that extra step to work harder. And I have become convinced that devolving these sorts of schemes to the local area committees and working closely with, which would be across party on these sorts of proposals, would be the right way forward. Because I think I started the donut proposal in the year dot of working around the city centre to control parking zones, and I completely agree that Councillor Diamond has given a very fair account of why these are a good thing, and the officers have answered why we expect people to pay for it to some degree, because it's not something we can quite do for nothing. And I was also pondering, Chair, that although the consultation has produced a large number of people with questions about the scheme, I think that generally where we have put them in over the years, I don't think we've had a flood of people coming to us and saying, take them out, this is awful. It's generally been quite well received once they've bedded in. But I've got convinced that this particular one, in this particular way, from start to finish, we haven't covered ourselves in glory. And I mean that as councillors and the members, you've worked very hard on it. So I, like everyone else, I'm prepared to take a hit on this. And don't you feel too disappointed, I hope, that we're suddenly now at the point of decision thinking, well, this isn't quite going to work. But I do share the view now, it isn't quite going to work. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Auckland. That therefore takes us to looking at the recommendations, and I'm going to propose that we move to a vote on the officers' recommendations. Do I have a consensus in the room amongst members that we should be moving to a vote? I imagine I know how this is going to go, and therefore I imagine that I'll therefore be taking this in two particular sections. The first thing I need to do is ask members present, all those in favour of the recommendations, please raise your hand. I therefore don't have a unanimous recommendation from the committee, so therefore I need to ask for a show of hands again. So as the result is not unanimous, apologies, I need to be really clear about this, can I ask all those who are against to raise their hands? If you could put your hands down, thank you very much. And any abstentions? That means that the recommendation is lost, and we don't proceed with the current scheme in its current form. The number of votes against the item were 6, and there were 0 abstentions, and 3 in favour of the recommendations. Thank you very much to members of the public for coming along. Thank you very much to officers for your diligent work in producing that report. That therefore moves us on to the next item of business that we have today. That was meant to be item 9 on the agenda, but we moved it forward. So going back to the original agenda, we have item 7, which is the work programme. We know that this is the committee's work programme and it's attached on Appendix 1 for consideration and discussion. I'm mindful of time progressing and the need for us to make progress in the meeting. Amanda from Democratic Services, could you outline a little bit more about the work programme?
Thank you, Chair. So the work programme is attached to item 7, just there for information and for members to know if you're happy with it. Obviously that will grow and develop now we're in this term of the new committee. And page 38, there are the proposed additions and amendments at this point in time. If there are any questions, I'm sure Will be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Do I see any questions or contributions about the work programme? Of course, there will be opportunities for members to meet and make suggestions and work together collaboratively to develop the work programme, but people are welcome to make those recommendations now as well. Councillor Gamble-Pugh, I saw you first.
Thank you. I've got a general point and a specific proposal. Do you want me to do both, or shall I just give the specific?
Please do both together. That would be very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. So the general point was that at this point at the start of the municipal year last year, as a new committee, we were had an opportunity to form what we felt were our priorities that should be on the work plan for the municipal year ahead. There wasn't, as far as I can remember it, a rolled forward, jam-packed schedule of issues and bits of work that had rolled over from the transitional committees or from the cooperative executive, etc. It was more or less, very much more, a blank piece of paper. And we've now got the kind of a rolled over schedule that's very challenging, very difficult and very full. And I just have some concerns about whether we can do that agenda justice, and also whether we actually need to take some time out to think as elected members about what we think the priorities should be. We have precious little time in committee, and I just had, that was just a general observation that I had about shouldn't we be putting the brakes on a little bit and looking at if we were starting from scratch as we were last year. You know, and as a general principle, shouldn't policy committees be, you know, starting after each election? The council has changed. It's a new administration, newly elected people on a new local manifesto. And what are we saying at the minute seems to be, well, whatever you voted for and whatever we as four political parties put in our manifesto, we just carry on with the same, can't think what the polite word is, packed agenda. So that is the general point. I have a specific proposal for which I will be seeking a second chair, which is that we have an item which has appeared on the work plan, which is proposed by officers to be taken at our 19th of July meeting, which is a review on the future of green parking permits. My proposal is that I would like this committee to not have that on its work plan. I'll wait to hear what you want to do in terms of taking that, whether there needs to be a discussion or a debate, and I can speak further on it.
Thank you, Councillor Gamble-Pugh. You made two particular points there, and one including a proposal. If we could just take your proposal firstly. You've, as far as I understand it, outlined a case that a specific item should be removed from the work programme, and that's about a review about parking exemptions for electronic vehicles, EVs. In order for that to make progress, we would need a seconder for that particular proposal. Do I have a seconder for that proposal to remove the item from the work programme? Councillor Sanger.
Very briefly, we did discuss this at a briefing a number of months ago, where myself and Councillor Grocott both expressed the opinion that it was too early to remove the green parking permits, and clearly the Department for Transport were urging councils to do that, because now we'd reached the 5% threshold that the market would take over, and we would go from 5% to 80% by magic. But myself and Councillor Grocott at that briefing suggested that we wanted to keep the permits in, and I think that's what Councillor Campbell-Pugh is asking, so I'm happy to second it on that basis. The reason for taking it out is partly to answer Craig's first point about how packed we are, but I don't think we need to do this just yet. I know the government's asking us to do it, but I think we can delay it another year, because we're only at, as I say, 5 or 6% of EV ownership, and we need it much higher. I still think we need to have incentives for people to go down the electric vehicle route.
Thank you, Councillor Sanger. Do we have consensus amongst members that that's the correct course of action to remove that?
Sorry, just as a point of a procedural point. Now that we've got a proposer and a seconder, may I speak?
Of course. I'm minded, Councillor Campbell-Pugh, that we've got a very finite amount of time on our agenda, and we can operate in that way very formally. On this occasion, if that's how the meeting wishes to proceed, we'll allow you to do that. Councillor Campbell-Pugh?
Yeah, just very briefly, what we're being asked to do is to introduce this into our committee work plan on the basis of, it says here, that it is an appropriate time to consider the removal of the council's free green parking permits. My view is that we need to be doing everything that we can to encourage and support people to continue what is still a very difficult transition away from the most polluting and most harmful vehicles towards EVs. We know that EVs are not the solution to the climate crisis. We know that there are lots of problems, but I just don't see that in the very limited time we have on our committee agenda, I don't see that discussing a proposal to remove that incentive is in line with our strategy on the climate emergency at this current time.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell-Pugh. I'm just getting some clarification from the Assistant Director of Legal and Governance as to how to progress with this amendment to the work programme.
Yeah, sorry. So what the council is, and it's been seconded, is proposing is an amendment to the recommendations in my reading to essentially say that the committee's work programme is approved subject to the change that has been described. So you are now open to debate that proposed amendment. A vote will be taken on that proposed amendment. If it is carried, it changes the substantive recommendations to as proposed, and then you'll go on to make to take a vote on the substantive recommendation, either changed by the amendment or not, depending on the outcome of that vote.
Thank you for the clarification there, Robert. It's really appreciated. Do I see any indications from members who wish to make a contribution, either in support or against of this particular course of action? Councillor Diamond.
Absolutely. I want to speak against this. I think it's an equality issue. There's no reason why people should have free city centre parking. As Craig said, EVs are not the solution to the climate emergency. In terms of air quality, the particulates from tyres are what is damaging to people's health, which councillors should be aware of. Also, EVs are very expensive, so you're giving free city centre parking to some of the most affluent people in the city, which is completely wrong, in my opinion. I don't see why owners of EVs should have free city centre parking. The embodied carbon in transitioning all the cars to EVs, that's out the window. We can't do that. What we need to be doing is prioritising a modal shift away from cars altogether to cycling, to buses, free public transport. The sign of a developed society is not how many people own cars, it's when rich people use public transport. So that's what we should be prioritising. So I've got a counter proposal to bring forward onto the work plan, workplace parking levy, which would actually tackle the climate emergency, and we should reject this addition to the work plan. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution there. Clearly you also, as part of your contribution, made another suggestion of an addition, and we take that separately, depending on the advice from the Assistant Director of Legal and Governance. I can see another member indicating...
Chair, I was just wanting to declare an interest. I thought we were discussing whether to move it up the agenda, not actually the issue itself. But if we're discussing the issue itself, as a member of the Green Parking Scheme, I should declare an interest and I'll shut me gun.
Thank you very much, Councillor Barker, for that. I can see Councillor Auckland indicating.
Thanks, Chair. It's just to clarify what we were told on the legal position. I thought what was said was, if we accept the amendment, which I'm minded to accept that amendment, then we would then be effectively amending the main recommendation, and then we would vote to accept, as it were, the rest of the work programme. And I'm disinclined, looking at our work programme, to think that that's acceptable. There's far too much on it, but also the bit about, you know, listening and devolving. So there is stuff on there that we could talk about devolving.
So, yeah, so you are at the moment debating a proposed amendment to the recommendation, which is that the committee approves the work programme subject to the removal of the future of green parking permits. If that is carried, it will change the substantive recommendation, but you'll then get a further opportunity on the substantive recommendation to propose additional amendments or other amendments, or to vote against or to hear of any other proposed changes. So hopefully that's clear, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Gilligan-Cubo.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to make a proposal. Can we have this discussion not in this committee meeting, because there's a lot of issues to discuss and I think we're taking up a lot of valuable time, and perhaps we should agree between us in one of our briefings what we want on the agenda and what we don't.
Councillor Gilligan-Cubo, I appreciate what you're saying, but I guess we have to be mindful of the standing orders. This is one of the quirks of our committee system, and whilst we can make suggestions and discuss things outside the meeting, if members wish to bring forward formal changes to the work programme, there's a process with which we have to deal with them as well. I don't see any other members who are wishing to make a contribution on this particular item, so I'm going to therefore take it to a vote.
Yep, so we're now voting on the proposal to change the recommendation. So that's the first step. We're not at this stage voting on the entire recommendation. It is whether or not the proposed amendment is acceptable to members. And for clarity, I think I formulated that correctly. Please jump in if not. But the proposed amendment is to the first line of the recommendations, and that's to essentially that the committee's work programme is approved subject to the removal of the future of green parking permits. So you're voting on whether to change that element of the recommendation.
Thank you very much for the clarification on that. So all those in favour of the recommendation, all those in favour of the motion to amend, please raise your hand. Put your hands down. Thank you. All those votes against? 2. And any abstentions? Oh, apologies. I need to be counted in favour. Thank you. So that therefore means that the recommendation to amend the work programme therefore is carried. Thank you very much, Councillor Gamble-Pugh, for making that recommendation. Councillor Diamond.
I wanted to propose an amendment to the work plan to propose that a feasibility study for a workplace parking levy be put onto the work programme for this committee.
Thank you, Councillor Diamond. I'll just turn to the Assistant Director of Legal and Governance with regards to the wording, just the clarification of it.
Yeah, so we've got another proposal here to amend the recommendation. Sorry, Councillor Diamond, could you repeat the change that you're seeking?
So I want the officers and committee to look at a feasibility study into a workplace parking levy for Sheffield, for large employers in Sheffield.
Okay, so that is to the proposal is to add to the recommendations, and we now know that that is the recommendations have the addition of the removal of the green permit scheme from the work programme, but it's also to add the, sorry, I'm jumping around windows here, to add an additional item, which is a feasibility study into a workplace parking levy for Sheffield, and you'll need a seconder.
Councillor Gilligan-Cubo as a seconder. Are there any members who wish to make a contribution? I don't see any members who wish to make a contribution. I do actually see Councillor Diamond, apologies, you do have an opportunity to...
I'll just, do we want... yes, I suppose Craig gave us a speech in favour of his proposal, so yes.
Apologies, Councillor Diamond, that was very unfair of me, and I apologise.
Okay, so you may be aware that in Nottingham they have a workplace parking levy which covers the largest employers in the city. It brings in upwards of £9 million a year in revenue, which they then invest in public transport and active travel infrastructure. I think this would be a brilliant addition to Sheffield. It would tackle the climate emergency, and obviously we need a feasibility study to investigate how this would work in Sheffield, and if this would work in Sheffield, and which large employers would be included. You know, there's a lot of things that feasibility study could consider to make it appropriate for our city, which might be different from Nottingham. But the potential impact on improving public transport, supporting our most disadvantaged communities, and improving our air quality, improving our public health, through improving active travel, investment in buses, bringing more buses back onto the roads and more bus routes, bringing back the number 10 bus, for example, are all things that could be achieved with a workplace parking levy. So I'd like a proposal just for a feasibility study into a workplace parking levy, so we can see, you know, whether this would be beneficial or not, and whether it would work in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Diamond. I think I saw Councillor Gamble-Pugh indicating a desire to speak a short while ago. Is that correct?
Yeah. At this point, because of the range of things that we've already got on the work plan, I'm not convinced that I would be able to support a feasibility study on workplace parking levy. I am, however, conscious that this has been a topic that kind of keeps coming up in various different meetings of the council and its committees, and I believe that there is a motion that was passed with cross-party support. I don't know which parties supported it, but there was an agreement at full council, I think, as part of the motion to have to kind of look at the issue. So whilst I'm not minded to vote in favour of Councillor Diamond's amendment to the committee work plan, I would support the party leads, the chair, vice chair, spokesperson in briefings as part of a broader shaping of the work plan for this municipal year, as I think Christine outlined, you know, would be a good thing to consider outside of the formal committee, to consider whether we do need to put workplace parking levy on the committee's work plan in some capacity, not necessarily to commit to a feasibility study. I'm not really sure what that would mean at this stage. So I'll be voting against Councillor Diamond's amendment, but I would suggest that the party leads on this policy area consider what needs to be discussed or considered by this committee or any other to follow up that motion that I believe was passed at full council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gamble-Pugh. Councillor Auckland.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Gamble-Pugh is quite right. We did have a vote in council, to my recollection, and we did say this was something that could be looked at. But I completely agree with Councillor Gamble-Pugh that it's not one for the work programme now, and I don't feel able to support an amendment at this stage. Quite happy for discussions to go on. Personally, I take a lot of persuading that this is the right proposal for Sheffield, but it's certainly something that is around a lot more than it used to be as a consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Auckland. If we could just once again just go back to the wording of that particular amendment, just to clarify it.
So the proposed amendment to the recommendation is the addition to the first paragraph that the committee's work programme is agreed, and that's subject to, firstly, the other amendment we've accepted, which is the removal of the future of green parking permits, and you are now voting on whether to add the amendment of and the addition of a feasibility study into a workplace parking levy for Sheffield.
Thank you, Robert, for that clarification. So, all those in favour of the amendment to the work programme, please raise your hand. Two. Put them down, thank you very much. All those against? 6. And all those abstaining? That proposal to amend the work programme therefore falls. Councillor Sanger.
Right, I want to go back to the work plan, which I remain minded to vote against. Just to go back to where we were. So, in the municipal year 2021, very little happened because we had COVID. So we had a cabinet system, but basically the cabinet system was overwritten by interim measures for most of it. So in 21-22 we had the Labour Green coalition, and clearly a lot of work was done on this agenda on transport and climate change. Regeneration was in a different portfolio. And then at the beginning of last meeting, and we had a transition committee that, although it didn't make decisions, did a lot of very useful work. And I mean, I didn't serve on that transition committee, but I did observe it, and I thought that they did a lot of useful work on the transition committee. So at the start of last year, we didn't have a blank sheet of paper, I'm afraid. We had a rollover of what officers had prepared, and frankly, it was all transport. And we as members put on the climate change because we feel that it's really important that we have our response to the climate and biodiversity crises on the agenda. And that's why last year's work plan got very big. We also felt that we couldn't just say, well, a regeneration scheme had been agreed by the cabinet member and the leader in 2017, and therefore it was never going to come to this committee. This committee would automatically agree with all decisions of all previous cabinets. So at that point, we felt that we needed to at least have some of these regeneration items coming to the committee. Chair, we had 2 workshops last year to try to get a grip of this agenda, of this work plan. Those workshops were not well attended by all members of this committee, I fear to say. We then put in further proposals both at Governance Committee and also to the all members' response to how the committee system was working. If you read the paper that's gone to the SNR briefing that happened 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, only TRC has got a work plan with lots of items without dates. We are the only ones. We have failed. We need to do something about this. Most of these items are good items. We've just had two amendments, but we're not going to get through this work plan. If we agree this today, it will be like we did this time last year. We will agree a work plan that is unachievable. We have to cut this down. We have to put dates on everything. We have to accept that, you know, today we have dealt with one substantive item. We can only deal with 3 substantive items in a meeting. We are going to have to be brutal and have a work plan that is achievable. This is not that work plan. We've got lots to do on it. Now, I fully accept the work that Transport Highways officers are doing with LAC managers in terms of delegating some schemes to LACs, and I think that is welcome. I understand it's coming in September to wherever it needs to go, whether that's SNR or you know, governance first and then SNR, and that would be great. But it will only be in September, and before then we will have small transport schemes. But this committee needs to take a strategic view of both the climate and the climate and biodiversity crises, the regeneration challenges of this city, and the strategic transport position of the city. And half of these items are not addressing that. So I think you need to put a line through this, with the exception of next month's meeting, and start again, as Councillor Gamble-Pugh said, with a blank piece of paper. You're only going to deal with 3 substantive items. We've dealt with 1 today, so I'm optimistic that we can do with 3. Last year, we dealt with less than half of what we intended to. In June 2022, we dealt with less than half. If we go ahead with this, we will achieve less than half. I propose getting rid of this, going away, coming back next month with a, you know, keep the July ones, and just come back with a work plan that is achievable and that we can all be proud of, and which can take the city forward on the incredibly important items that this committee is meant to deal with. I just think this work plan is too big, it's too bloated. We didn't deal with it last year, we've got to deal with it this year. Oh, sorry, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sanger. Before we deal with that item, and I can see that William would like to contribute and perhaps suggest a way forward. Before we do that, I'm mindful of the time. It's now 4:24 p.m. That means that we do have to consider extending the guillotine in the first instance by half an hour. I would need the meeting's approval in order to do that. Do I have consensus? Thank you very much. We will therefore extend the guillotine until 5 p.m. Will, I think you would like to contribute.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try and be really brief, conscious of time. Just to introduce, for those people online, I'm Will Stewart, Director of Investment, Climate Change and Planning at the City Council. Just 3 really quick points on the work plan. Just to reflect what members have said in the room, TRC is an incredibly heavy work plan, and you know, for the size of the committee, we've got a disproportionate amount of decisions to make. And I think, you know, we've all wrestled with that over the past year, and I think, you know, I agree with the sentiment that members are putting forward. We need to make some really strategic decisions. I think the second thing I would say is, through the governance review, a lot of people, members and officers, put forward their recommendations for what we might do with TRC. And as it stands, the recommendation is that there are no changes to the structure of this committee in terms of moving items out to other committees or so on and so forth. So we've got to deal with what we've got to deal with. As Councillor Sanger rightly said, we introduced, through a proposal that I prepared last year, some specific workshop sessions as part of this committee's briefing, in order that we could get on top of the work plan and decide what members wanted to see on that work plan. I proposed that we continue with that, and indeed I circulated a proposal just before the election, which I think members of the committee at that time agreed with. So my suggestion is that we continue and use that time to be able to do the prioritisation exercise that I think members are indicating they want to. My final point, though, is a really important one. We need to be fair to the officers that have prepared a lot of information for items that are upcoming on this agenda. So I'd just like members to bear that in mind. Behind some of the decisions that we've timetabled for later in this municipal year, there are reports being prepared, there is data being collected, there is analysis being sought out. And if it's members' decision to almost draw a line through that and begin again, we need to be mindful that there's a huge amount of work that has happened behind the scenes to prepare this work plan. You know, strategies are underway, proposals are underway, a lot of that requested by members previously. So I would just like to flag that, Chair, that I want to be mindful of officers' time and just being fair to them on the amount of work that's gone into the items that are proposed in future meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. And I think it's also important that we're all extremely mindful of the fact that this council and people voted in May, as the council leader has said, at full council for no overall control, but that clearly doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't get things done. And it's incumbent upon all of us to work together, perhaps outside of this formal setting, in order to draw together a work plan that brings together our political priorities and drives forward all the change that needs to occur in this city. Because, as Will has rightly pointed out, there are a number of quite important schemes that we need to bring forward, particularly to our next meeting, but also in September as well. And people across Sheffield deserve and expect that we will be making decisions on those items. So that, therefore, Councillor Auckland.
I think an observation that I'd make back to officers is, in a way, a lot has changed on the council. The Charities Subcommittee, which I surprisingly found myself chairing, I found myself quoting Lenin of all people. You know, the bit about there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen. The elections, the continuation of no overall control, it has, and the things that people have said, you've just said now, Chair, mean perhaps the council has made some significant changes, maybe since the elections in May. So I think it's important that there's some checking back, and we saw it with the Parkhill scheme, really. There was a lot more, well, what about local decision making? What about consultation? And so some of the things that are on the agenda need a bit of perhaps a fact check again, as part of the hard work that officers are doing. The other thing I'd say is that if all these things are on the work programme and are important and people expect us to make decisions on them, as Will has said, then we're going to have more meetings. I can't see, and if we're going to do the truth, trust, transparency stuff, it's not good that we cutting and drying things in briefings. Briefings are fine for information for members, but if there are big decisions that, because of the meeting schedule we've got, mean that they get discussed in a few minutes, that's not good for public involvement either. So at the risk of making myself unpopular, it's either change the work programme or we've got to have more meetings scheduled, and that's got implications, hasn't it, too, for the workload. My last year here, Chair, so I can propose a bit more work. Perhaps.
Well, Councillor Auckland, I don't think it does make you unpopular. I see nodding at the other side of the room as well. So that therefore takes us forward with the recommendation of this report, with the caveat that it does now have one amendment to it, which Robert has outlined a short while ago. I'm going to ask all those in favour of the recommendation to please raise your hand. Okay. So apologies. I think Councillor Shaw asked what the recommendation was. It's the recommendation to approve the work programme with the caveat of the amendment that was made and proposed by Councillor Gamble-Pugh, which now forms the substantive of the work programme with the recommendation now. So I asked a short while ago for all those in favour of the recommendation to raise your hand. I didn't see anyone. Now, if I can ask all those against the recommendation to raise their hand. 6 against, thank you. And all of those who are abstaining to raise, and also apologies, I should vote against, thank you. and we've got 2 abstentions. Thank you. That therefore falls. That doesn't mean to say that we won't continue to work together cooperatively to draw together a work programme, and it's incumbent upon all of us to do that in our regular meetings as outlined by Will as well. That therefore takes us on to item 8 of the agenda, which is the 2022 and 23 financial outturn, which is on page 59 to 68 of the agenda pack. And the presenting officer is Jane Wilby, who has sat very patiently. Thank you, Jane. If you could take us through this. And thanks for putting this together.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Jane Wilby, Head of Accounting, so I'm here today to present the 22-23 outturn position. We took the full paper to the Finance Committee yesterday, so each of the policy committees get a summarised version relating to the policy committee. The outturn paper supports our annual statement of accounts, which we have produced a draft and in line with statutory deadlines for the 31st of May, and they will be presented to the Audit Committee next week. So the headlines on the General Fund was we overspent by 5 million against a net revenue budget of 450. This meant that we had an unplanned draw from reserves to meet that in-year deficit. In 21-22, we'd identified a £70 million risk reserve to manage the risk associated with the delivery of our budgets and ambitious savings targets. So we used 20 million of that in 21-22. We used 15 when we came to set the budget for 22-23. So really, in 22-23, the full draw on the reserve was more like 20 million to include that 5 million in-year deficit. So that leaves us a 30 million as we go into 23-24 to manage the risk associated with delivery of this year's budget. So the closing position did improve significantly throughout the year, from a position of overspend of over 20 million during the first part of the year down to 5 million as we closed. The table on page 62 of the pack shows the improvement each month and which of each committee budgets contributed towards that improvement. So we saw a 6 million improvement in the adult social care committee budgets, and a lot of that was to do with the winter discharge funding that we received from central government towards the back end of the year. The Transport, Regen and Climate Committee improved by 2.5 million. That was largely to do with the mitigation of the saving associated with the Clean Air Zone that was put in place for the 22-23 budget. The Strategy and Resources budget improved by 4.5 million. Lots of that was to do with income from investments that we had due to the favourable interest rates that we saw throughout the year. We also had additional income from central government on our business rate levy surplus. The main reasons for the overspend across the board, though, were delivery shortfalls in our budget implementation plans. We were showing 19.5 million of this was not delivered in 22-23. So we did have some one-off mitigations that we drew from reserves to offset some of those delivery challenges, particularly in respect for the inflationary impact that we saw in 22-23. On page 63, I talk about the year-on-year uplift that we saw in energy prices that we had to cover in year. So we saw over 100% increase in our energy prices across the council, and that resulted in an over £5 million increase in our energy bills in the year, which we covered from drawing down from provisions that we'd accounted for in previous periods. So in the Transport, Regen and Climate Committee, we had an underspend in this committee of 1.2 million against a net budget of 29.7 million. So the challenges in this budget this year were around the CAS saving, Clean Air Zone saving that was put in place as part of the 22-23 process. Both the timing of the implementation of the zone and legislation surrounding the use of the funding meant that proposals were not deliverable in year, so we covered that through one-off use of a reserve. Challenges in planning income were a problem last year. We did end up behind forecast with our planning income, but we did have some upside in our highways network management income. This is difficult to predict. It depends on what utility companies and the disruption to roads happen within the year, and it's often not easy to predict and forecast. So this somewhat offset the reduced planning fee income for the year. So finance colleagues will continue to support the services with the committee budgets to ensure that accuracy in forecasting and budget monitoring as we move into 23-24. So I'm happy to take any questions on the overall outturn for the council or anything for the Transport Committee in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane, for that report to the committee, which we very much appreciate. Can I ask if there are any questions from the committee with regards to that report? There aren't, which is wonderful. Are we all agreed? If any member wishes to dissent, please raise your hand. Apologies, Councillor Campbell-Pugh. You're agreeing, so there is no dissent. That therefore means that we have unanimously agreed the financial outturn report presented by Jane. Thank you very much, Jane, and thank you for bearing with us. That therefore moves us on to item 10 of our agenda. Item 10 is on pages 149 to 188 of the agenda pack, and presenting is, I believe, David. David, thank you very much for joining us today, and sorry to make you wait.
No problem. I've slowly been editing down what I've been saying as the time goes on, so I'm very cognizant of time. The works outlined in the report include the widening of walkways under the canopy area in Broomhill Centre, included the suspension of 11 parking spaces, which included two disabled parking bays. However, 2 disabled parking bays were retained in front of the shops, and 2 further disabled parking spaces were introduced on Spooner Road and then on Taptonville Road. We did have a petition from a local trader, which started in August 2020, immediately after the works were complete. It received just over 1,300 signatures. Although the petition was arranged via change.org, it doesn't appear that it was formally submitted to the council. That the loss of parking appeared to be the main issue. So in order to test the merits of the scheme and carry out a more formal statutory consultation, an experimental traffic regulation order was advertised in March 2022. The report covers the outcome of that process. There were 2 responses to the consultation, both of these objections, but there were comments made too. The key points within the objections were concerns around the impact of trade for local businesses, particularly the loss of parking, lack of space for loading, unloading, changes increasing air pollution, and the potential misuse of disabled bays. Parking is still available in the local area, including on street, in local car parks, both managed by SCC and a private sector provider on the roof of the precinct itself. Loading and unloading is still available on WL lines within the area of the shop frontage, and the misuse of disabled parking bays was taken up with parking services in from day one. Other comments on the scheme included the perceived benefits of not having vehicles queuing out onto Fulwood Road while waiting for a space, and also representatives of BBES, which is a body made up of people who live and work in Broomhill, Broomfield, Encliffe, Summerfield and Tapton, have been supportive of the proposals, given the linkages to the policy direction of the adopted neighbourhood plan and a desire to see the frontage improvements and general placemaking initiatives as well, which have been highlighted by the chair of the Broomhill Independent Traders Association. Correspondence on this point has reduced significantly over the past 2 years, in parallel with people having become more used to the scheme being in place. Local members are also supportive of the current scheme. There are perceived negatives, but I hope the report sets out the benefits so that the recommendation to make the ETRO permanent can be supported. More than happy to take questions from committee if required.
Thank you very much for that very comprehensive and detailed, but to the point report. It's very much appreciated, David. Are there any comments or questions from the committee? Councillor Shaw and Councillor Sanger, and also I can see that Councillor Campbell-Pugh as well. So Councillor Shaw first.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to be very quick. Thank you for the report. Thank you for the explanation. I was just going to say that this is, again, one of the kinds of decisions that should be devolved to LACS rather than coming to this committee, as we've said time again. Pleased to see that ward members support this proposal and the local neighbourhood forums, like BBES, and that it fits in with their aspirations for the neighbourhood and potential further investment from other schemes in the area. It fits in with our strategic climate and mode shift aspirations for the city, and local plans, 20-minute neighbourhoods, and other issues that I've raised within this committee and within the council as well. And so I'm certainly leaning in favour of approving this proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Shaw. Councillor Sanger.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to the officers. So really 2 questions. So one is in terms of this petition. I mean, clearly there was a groundswell of people when this first came out. I mean, clearly it was a temporary COVID scheme on which we're making a permanent decision on now. There clearly was a lot of people who signed a petition, and it's frustrating that they didn't get, it didn't get formally submitted. But it seems to me that, I mean, would it be fair to say that some of the people who signed the petition were from outside the immediate area? I mean, I know from people I've spoken to in both, both Crooks and Ranmore, who were concerned about this scheme because it was taking away their parking space, but they're not necessarily people who live and, who live near these shops. So, I mean, that would be my first question. What do we know about the petition? Why was it not submitted? I think my second one is that myself and other members of my household regularly walk past this site and would like to know about the parking enforcement on these disabled spaces, because I reckon about half the vehicles are not clearly displaying a disabled badge that are parking in these spaces at the moment. And if we do need those spaces for disabled people, we're going to need to vigorously enforce these parking spaces. So I would like to know what level of parking enforcement can we carry out, and are my observations that half the vehicles are breaking the rules, is that about correct? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sanger. Councillor Gamble-Pugh.
Mine isn't a question, it's a comment.
Apologies. Actually, I think I need to go back to David for an answer to that. My mistake.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't know the detail of where all 1,300 came from, but I think your assumption is absolutely right, Councillor Sanger. It did come from people outside of the direct area as well. I think, interestingly, we didn't cover it in the introduction, but it was mentioned, albeit a 2017 report that had been done previously, that actually the number of people or how people actually get to Broomhill Centre walking is by far the biggest, and some economics were done around the value of spend by different modes, and cars was actually, I think, the lowest from memory. Your second point about enforcement. So Broomhill fits within an established peripheral parking scheme or controlled parking zone, as they've been referred to before. So there is actually additional parking enforcement wardens within the area over and above some other areas within the city. So it's not a dedicated resource, but there is some to the particular blue badge spaces. But there is that regular resource within Broomhill. I think enforcement it is an issue generally. We do have a reasonably sized enforcement team, but that they can't be everywhere all of the time, and I'm sure that people will take risks if they perceive the fact that they won't actually get a ticket. But they can also be quite responsive if we get in touch with colleagues at Parking Services through the control office, to go and look at specific issues. And as I say, they can be quite responsive because there are offices in the area. It is a known issue, the fact that we obviously can't be everywhere all of the time.
Thank you for that response. I just think it is an area where we're going to need to carry out vigorous enforcement. There was always, we're talking about taking a small number of spaces away permanently. Clearly, the disabled people need those spaces more than able-bodied motorists, and we just need to enforce those disabled spaces. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sanger. Councillor Gamble-Pugh, appreciate you didn't want to ask a question of officers, but you did want to make a point about the way forward with this particular proposal.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very, very happy to support this proposal today. I just wanted to reinforce the point that's been made by myself and others time and time again at our committee over the past year, which is that really the decision making of the detail of how these schemes are implemented is best taken by the local communities, the ward councillors and the local stakeholders. That is how we will get schemes which can be adopted seamlessly without causing problems and are best placed to meet the strategic objectives. So the strategic objectives should be being borne in mind and considered by this committee, after which the actual detail of which bollards go where and where the parking bays are, etc., is best placed by those who have more local knowledge. And with that in mind, I did email, it was only within the last couple of days, the 3 ward councillors just to check that they had no concerns about how they'd been consulted with or with the implementation of the scheme. I think because of the timescale, I haven't had any kind of thing significant back from them, but I just wanted to check that out with them because they're the people with the local knowledge and they are the voices of the local stakeholders after all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gamble-Pugh. That therefore takes us to a vote on item 10, the report with regards to the experimental traffic regulation order. I'm going to ask all those in favour of the recommendations presented in the report to raise your hand. Brilliant. It looks like I have consensus. Thank you very much. That item therefore passes. Thank you very much to David for presenting that to us today and for the hard work in putting it together. Item 11 is the EATF legacy projects, which is on Division Street. It's on page 189 to 222 of the agenda pack, and presenting will be Tom Finnegan-Smith. Thank you, Tom. I know it's been such a long day for you, and I really appreciate it.
That's fine, Chair. Thank you. I'll try and be as concise and accurate as David was. And similar to David's item, the last item, this is a scheme that was initially introduced as part of our response to COVID-19 through emergency active travel measures and funding that was provided for those. So effectively, at Division Street, a section of Division Street between Westfield Terrace and Rockingham Street has been closed since August 2020. The scheme did change in January last year. That's when we introduced the scheme as an experimental traffic order, and changes were made on street to allow access through from Westfield Terrace, end of Division Street, to Canning Street, so that access could be maintained to a business in an off-street car park, which was back in use at that point. The experimental traffic order, as I say, has been in since January 2022. That has given us time to see the scheme in the ground and to test that and understand the feedback that we're receiving from local businesses, local residents that may be affected by the closure. Paragraph 1.8 of the report sets out the detail of the scheme that's currently in place and the traffic management measures around the prohibition of driving. Clearly, that the ETO process enables us to consider the feedback that we receive and make any relevant changes, but in taking a decision, and the recommendation today is to retain the scheme on a permanent basis. We've set out the detail of the consultation in the appendix. In terms of the prohibition of driving, the benefits of retaining that we see as a safer environment for cyclists on this section of Division Street. Before driving was prohibited, Division Street formed part of a longer route that many drivers did use to travel through the city centre. So reducing down that opportunity for a through route by the link in the middle being prohibited from driving does give some priority to pedestrians and to cyclists and make the area along Division Street more attractive for cycling, but also safer. Since those changes were introduced, we have had a number of the local businesses taking opportunity to use the closed space on Division Street, particularly those that are food and beverage related, to offer outdoor seating. So that was initially in response to the COVID recovery, but that has continued, and it does increase the capacity of those businesses and also increases the local vitality of the local street scene. I mentioned the consultation, and the consultation is set out in detail in section 3 of the report. We have had 17 responses that form 6 objections and 11 people supporting the proposals. The concerns raised are set out in paragraphs 3.4 to 3.23, but they do vary in nature. So they refer to cyclists travelling at speed and concerns around safety, restrictions on access to homes and businesses and cycle parking, lack of space that is residually left for deliveries and associated congestion, and so on and so forth. I do want to highlight that there have also been concerns raised about the enforcement of restrictions in the pedestrian and cycle zone. Parking services have confirmed that drivers parking or loading on the pedestrian and cycle zone restrictions can be issued with instant penalty charge notices, although those are restricted to just the south side of Division Street, with the experimental traffic order effectively retaining existing restrictions on the north side of the closed section of the road. We have undertaken a review of signing, and it has been noted that we've identified that there is an additional sign plate on the traffic signpost at Division Street, which indicates a no waiting at any time restriction. That is on the entry into the pedestrian and cycle zone. That is an incorrect sign, and it's not contained in the experimental traffic order. All of the restrictions which are actually in the experimental traffic order are correctly signed. The council has not carried out enforcement of a no waiting at any time restriction on Division Street, apart from the locations where double yellow lines are present. And the incorrect plate has had no effect on the operational of the experimental scheme. All aspects of the experimental traffic order procedure have been correctly carried out. The council has not had at any point communicated that the experimental traffic order contains a no waiting at any time restriction. We would remove the incorrect plate as soon as possible, and this does not exclude the council from exploring whether to implement a no waiting at any time restriction at some point in the future on Division Street. If that is going to be pursued, then we would obviously have to take forward a statutory process and a traffic regulation order. There have also been some concerns raised by some of the respondents about the presence of a sign referring to permit holders. The traffic signs on Division Street do indicate that permit holders are exempt from the restrictions. That's entirely correct, and it corresponds to the experimental traffic order. No permits have been issued in relation to that, but that does not mean that the experimental traffic order is invalid or incapable of being made permanent. So, essentially, moving to the recommendation, given the benefits arising from the scheme that we've seen over the last 2 to 3 years, and noting the consultation responses, we are recommending that the Division Street experimental traffic order scheme in place is made permanent due to the benefits it delivers. And as part of that, we will start to look at some of the issues around the enforcement of the moving traffic offences. That is where people are going in at the time that the restrictions are in place for various reasons. We'll be looking at working in an interim basis with the police, but clearly we have applied for and been confirmed that we are through the parliamentary process at the moment for powers to enforce moving traffic offences, which should be confirmed in the summer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tom, for that report. Do I see any indication to speak from members? Councillor Shaw and then Councillor Gamble-Pugh. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you for your forbearance, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Shaw, my apologies, this is my fault. I should have, before asking you to speak, asked for permission to extend the guillotine as it is 4:56. Do I have consensus from the meeting to extend the guillotine? It'll only be this last occasion, because we can only extend it on 2 occasions. I'm very sorry, Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. Is your first day? It's fine. Yes, quick comment. I mean, this scheme, the National Cycle Route 6 passes through this closure, and I've seen it's very, very popular with cyclists and pedestrians going on this section of Division Street. So it's kind of a request, really, that assuming that this is made permanent, any future works in that area, it's a request to kind of include LTN compliant cycleway through it, so that, clearly demarcated, so as to prevent potential conflict between pedestrian cyclists and other road users as much as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillor Gamble-Pugh.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I wanted to, just for the purposes of the minutes and for the purposes of keeping our minds razor focused on the issue, it's the same point again, that this, as a local scheme, the detail of how it's implemented is best placed by the local ward councillors, the LACs, etc., etc., etc. I have had a really interesting exchange with the ward councillors, who obviously are very happy with this scheme, because they recognise, as we do as a committee, the strategic importance of this particular scheme, particularly as it's got such a crucial cycle route running through it, as Councillor Shaw has outlined. I think that the correspondence I've had with the ward councillors actually flags up the fact that we do need to find a way of devolving the local element of these schemes whilst not abdicating ourselves from those difficult choices sometimes of pushing ahead with doing the right things on climate and the other strategic priorities for the city. But we do need to find a way of getting these decisions devolved out.
Thank you, Councillor Gamble-Pugh, and I think that's an issue that we'll keep revisiting from this committee, and no doubt you will continue to remind us. Councillor Diamond?
Yeah, I'd just like to push back on that a bit, because this is a city centre thing. Are you suggesting that all city centre developments be devolved to the councillors in City Ward? I mean, I'm personally, given the makeup of that ward, politically I wouldn't be against that, but that obviously is not a good way of running the city centre, because it's for the benefit of all of the people of Sheffield. And I think big strategic decisions like transport decisions need to be taken with a whole city strategy in mind. And I'd just like to go back and say that in the previous decision that we made about Parkhill, we haven't looked at, we didn't consider the strategic implications of that and what that means in terms of the vision for the city, which in my view is a very disappointing decision. Just back to this particular one, I was wondering if there was any plans to work with the CCTV control centre to tackle some of the parking infringements that still go on Division Street, and when would it be possible to bring forward like no waiting on the north side of Division Street, because sometimes that is quite dangerous, going down to Vision Street. If there's somewhere you have to, if you're cycling down, you might have to forced into incoming traffic because of people parked on double yellows.
Thank you, Councillor Diamond. Tom, are you able to help with those points?
Yep, thank you, Chair. In terms of enforcement, parking restrictions through Division Street wouldn't be, we wouldn't be able to enforce those through CCTV. We would be able to enforce moving traffic offences via camera. That is our intention. Clearly, if people are going into that restricted pedestrian and cycle zone when they shouldn't be accessing beyond the signs, then they certainly shouldn't be parking or loading or taking place any activity beyond those signs. So that is one of the things that we will have the powers for, as the committee has considered and supported the submission to government for those powers. It also identified and supported the first 3 locations where we'd roll those powers out if we receive them. But beyond those first 3 locations, this is probably a site that we would want to be looking at. I know that members of the committee previously indicated they had a long list of locations as well that they wanted to consider, but we'll need to work through that with the committee and to set out that forward plan in terms of where next.
Thank you, Tom, for answering that point. That therefore takes us to the recommendations of this report, which is on page 190 of your document pack, and it's to approve the experimental traffic regulation order and for it to be made permanent. If any member, are we all agreed? If any member wishes to dissent, please raise your hand. Looks like we are in agreement and we have a consensus. Thank you very much, and thank you, Tom, for presenting that item on Division Street. That therefore takes us on to item 12, which is the Herdings 20 miles an hour scheme, the traffic regulation order consultation report. It's on pages 223 and 238 of the agenda pack, and Lisa is going to run us through it again. It also follows another very similar item, item 13 in Westfield, that we'll have to take separately, but Lisa will talk to them separately, I believe, yeah. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. This is an objection report for the Herdings 20 mile an hour scheme. This forms part of the Council's commitment to install 20 mile an hour schemes in all suitable residential areas of Sheffield, in line with our 2012 speed limit strategy. We have received 21 responses to the traffic regulation order advertisement. 5 were objections and 16 in support. 2 of the objections were what I would call softer objections, where they don't say specifically that they object to the scheme, but I always err on the side of caution and include them if they're not specifically saying that they support the scheme either. The objections were the sort of normal stuff that we get in response to these, that it would cause heavy traffic, asking how the scheme would be policed. One resident was reporting more issues that were happening in his area in terms of antisocial behaviour, and asking why the money wasn't being used to fund the issues like that instead of wasting money on a scheme such as this. We have written back to all people raising responses to us, including that guy, suggesting other areas that he can report instances to. I've taken one of his queries away to the bus operators because it was specifically about where buses park, obstructing traffic. These schemes tend to be, on the whole, really well supported by the public, and we have local member support as well. So the recommendation is to allow the scheme to progress to detailed design, and in line with the 2012 speed limit strategy, that's the recommendation.
Thank you, Lisa, for taking us through that. Are there any comments or contributions from elected members? Councillor Sanger.
Thank you, Chair, and pleased that we're getting through these. I think it's just it is incredibly frustrating, the process. I mean, clearly this was policy 2008 to 9. We had a process which would have got through in 14, 15 if we carried on, but we had a 7-8 year hiatus. I'm just concerned that even in the last year we've had delay, and both High Green and Forward have slipped another 6 months. And that's frustrating, but all I would reiterate, and I'm going to keep saying this, as other colleagues are saying, this is work that really needs to go to the LACs as soon as possible, but the quicker it's all done. And I notice that after High Green and Forward go through, you've still got Brincliffe, Earl Marshall, Greenland, Loxley, Netherthorpe and Bradway. So there's still lots more to do. I say there was a policy position taken in the late 2000s, 14, 15 years ago. We just need to get this done. There's clearly going to be, there were some objections to each of them, but I think everybody, all 3 major parties represented on the council accept that residential streets need to move to 20. The quicker it's done, the better. So I'm fully supportive of this, but frustrated that both High Green and Forward have slipped again, but supportive of this particular scheme. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sanger. Councillor Auckland.
I just want to check on where we are with the sort of design standards, because we seem to have reached the position where it's simply signs, and simply a sign on the left-hand side of the road, and with my observation, I think, in some places, not, as it were, 2 signs to mark the entry points.
Do you know any
And a few
specifics I can look
route
into? We do routinely put them on both sides of the street with road markings as well. So if you can find me any specifics, I can have a look if it's a legacy scheme,
Before I
whether it's
commit
gone
myself
missing.
to something in my own ward, I'm
Yeah.
going to have another look.
Pop it through to me on email. I'll certainly look into it because
Yeah.
we do a sign on each side of the road. So yeah, let me know if
Thanks
that's
for
an
doing all this
issue.
work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for putting that report together. Before we vote on it, it's interesting of note, isn't it? And Councillor Richards reminds me of it because of her heritage that the Welsh Labour government have introduced a default 20-mile-an-hour speed limit across the whole country, making it significantly easier for local authorities to introduce such measures as well. And I can see agreement amongst members here that that would be a valuable thing to do in our country. So that therefore takes us to the vote on this particular item, on item 12. Are we all agreed? If any member wishes to dissent, please raise your hand. No member wishes to dissent, therefore that item has been passed unanimously. Thank you, and thank you, Lisa. Item 13 is the Westfield 20 miles per hour scheme. Lisa, thank you.
Thank you. So exactly as you said for Herdings, but this is in Westfield. We received 18 responses, just one objection, which was about possibly causing heavy traffic. Again, really good local support from the members. The only difference in this scheme is we are proposing a part-time advisory 20-mile-an-hour outside the school on Westfield Northway, as well as some other little small measures to shore up the fact that there is a playground opposite the school. So we're going to upgrade the signage, put some markings on the road to try and make it quite clear that there's a playground as well as a school. So that's the only difference between the Herdings and the Westfield.
Thank you, Lisa. Do I see any members indicating to speak? I don't, therefore we'll move straight to a vote. Are we all agreed? If any member wishes to dissent, please raise your hand. No member has dissented, therefore that passes, and we approve that scheme in Westfield, item 13. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for putting together that piece of work. Item 14 is Mode Shift Stars, Active Journeys to School, which is an exciting and interesting report about how we help young people. It's on pages 253 to 260 of the agenda pack, and our presenting officer is Kat Harrison. Kat, thank you, and thanks for waiting for us to get to this item.
Hi, I'm going to be really quick, it's really hot. So, Mode Shift Stars is the national accreditation scheme for schools who work towards road safety and active travel targets. Sheffield City Council have been supporting Sheffield schools in this for a number of years. What we need to do to support more schools to go further in this programme is people. So this report is basically asking to spend some money that we have got, but because it's over £250,000, I need this committee's agreement to spend it. So we are asking for an increased staff resource of one whole extra person, which honestly will make a huge difference to Sheffield. So at the minute we've got roughly about 40 schools on board. With a whole extra person, we're looking at like another 40 schools. So this is another 40 schools that are going to give us travel survey data, another 40 schools that will receive some sort of walking intervention, some sort of bike intervention, whether that is learn to ride, whether it's scooter skills, whether it's a walking bus, whether it's just a road safety assembly. All of these schools getting on board with this programme is an excellent route for us as a city to have more adults walking and cycling everywhere. 2022 was a great year. We had in the country the most number of platinum accredited schools. That's the highest level of accreditation you can get. Sheffield had the most because our team is amazing. We want to keep them. We want to add to it. One of our primary schools, Phillimore Primary School in Darnall, won the Regional School of the Year and went on to win the National Award. This is huge. We want more. Please can we have it? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kat, and thank you for the enthusiastic manner in which you ran us through that report. And, you know, I was going to mention specifically, but you just said it, didn't you, the wonderful work of Phillimore Community Primary School in Darnell that's been recognised with that National Mode Shift Stars award as well, which is absolutely brilliant, and your team does some amazing work. So thank you. I can see 2 contributions. Councillor Sanger.
I just want to support the enthusiasm. I mean, you know, Fillmore's is really wonderful, but also the other schools that have achieved platinum. We've just got to keep at it. I mean, we all know that when we're in school holidays, half of Sheffield's transport issues disappear, and if we can win the battle in terms of travel to and from school, we are so much closer to sorting out Sheffield's transport problems, and we can. And you know, this sort of scheme is what we need to support. So all power to their elbow. Really think we need to endorse this report, and you get this money and get this extra officer, and one officer will make a huge difference. So really important. We just keep at it. When I was cabinet member for Children's Services, it was one of the big issues we had, trying to get more children to walk, cycle, scoot to school, and it's still on the top 5 of issues we have to do in the city, so we just got to keep at it. But really pleased we've got some good news today. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Councillor Sanger. Can just remind members, we've now got just over 15 minutes before we have to take things formally, if that's the view of the meeting. So if we just keep our contributions really brief, that would be brilliant, and we'll give the officer an opportunity to speak on item 15. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to be quick. So, yeah, Mode Shift Stars is a fantastic national, local, regional programme, and our council officers who work with schools do a fantastic job, and I'd really like to place our thanks to them on record for their continued hard work. If we, I forget the name of the school, but I know that I know one school they reduced their modal share of cars, of parents taking kids to school by car, from 40% down to 10% after involvement with the Mode Shift programme. So that's a significant reduction, and it's really part of the measures that we need to have to meet our climate and road safety targets. Mode Shift Stars can't exist in a vacuum, and we need to make sure that we, as well as teaching kids how to ride bikes and things like that, encouraging them to walk to school, we need to provide them with a safe infrastructure for them to do so. Whether that's 20-mile-an-hour zones, segregated cycle infrastructure, low traffic active neighbourhoods. There's a whole mix of things that we need to make sure we push forward, and this can't work by itself in a vacuum. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Shaw. Councillor Diamond.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Kat. Just like to thank you for that report. I'm really enthusiastic as well about all the work that you've been doing. You've got a fantastic team, and I think another staff member, we can just go even further. The impact on people's lives is brilliant in terms of reducing air pollution around schools, road safety around schools, making that modal shift that we really want to see, at least around school times. I'm just wondering if there's any plans to expand Mode Shift Stars to adults as well, and include travel to and from work, and maybe some of the committee members here might be interested in that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Diamond, for that. Kat, are you able to help with that question?
Yes, Mode Shift does have a business element to it, but currently there is no one within the council which could take on that portion of work, but it's all about business travel planning. So Mode Shift Stars at schools is school travel planning. There is an element of Mode Shift as a national organisation that deals with residential travel planning and business travel planning, but as far as I'm aware, there isn't anyone currently within our team which has the capacity to take on that particular element of work.
Thank you very much, Kat. And Councillor Gamble-Pugh.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to make a similar point about the fact that we've discussed how it's so difficult to persuade people to get behind us on these kind of climate action schemes, particularly about kind of persuading people, myself included, to leave the car at home when you can. And I know from my personal experience of when Motive Stars were doing work at my children's school, suddenly having this kind of, the nag factor, the pester power of little kids saying like, oh no, why do we have to go in the car? Why can't we go on our scooters? It's like, so I've got to get to hundreds of places. So we need more of it. I'm very happy to support it, and it's really interesting to hear that there's a broader base beyond the school's work, and I'll be looking forward to finding out a bit more about that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Campbell-Pugh. So that therefore takes us to the recommendations of this particular report, which I believe is on page 254 of our agenda pack. Are we all agreed? If any member wishes to dissent, please raise your hand. No member wishes to dissent. That means that it's been passed unanimously. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Kat, for presenting that to us today. Item 15 on our agenda, the final item on our agenda, is a consultation response on the publication of the draft Sheffield plan. It is the last item on our agenda, but it is by no means an insignificant item. It's very important for the future of our city. Laura, thank you very much for coming to present to us today.
Thank you. Hopefully you can all hear me. I'll also try to be fairly brief, and actually just skipping to the end, it's worth noting that our recommendations are that you note the issues arising which are set out in this report, and note that a schedule of amendments will be taken to the Strategy and Resources Committee, which is at the beginning of August. Excuse me. So this report, in brief, it gives an overview of the consultation that we carried out earlier this year in January and February on the publication draft Sheffield plan. Its key theme is to make you aware of the issues that were raised. It also sets out the process for how we'll be responding to those issues that have been raised. And as I said, that will be brought to the Strategy and Resources Committee in August. Following the report going to Strategy and Resources in August, we will then take the plan and any proposed amendments to full council in early September, and that is prior to submission of the plan to the government for examination, which will take place later in September. It then moves into the Planning Inspectorate's examination timescale. Critical issues within the report that it outlines are around what the process was that we took for consultation, how we developed engagement with different groups, and also who responded to our consultation. It identifies a number of themes that came through in those consultation responses. Obviously, we received over 400 consultation responses, which actually makes up just under 2,000 individual comments. The team is currently processing those and looking at how we'll respond to them, but amongst the key themes included comments around our overall spatial strategy, ranging from support for that, support for greenbelt protection, through to concerns about brownfield development. It also includes site allocations, which were raised, some which had particularly high response rates. Some additional sites have been proposed through this process. We had a lot of comments around the greenbelt boundary. Some were requests for additions to the greenbelt, some were requests for removal from the greenbelt. We also had comments around blue and green infrastructure, and specific representations on particular development management policies within the plan, such as around older people's accommodation, affordable housing, carbon emissions, biodiversity, a wide range of themes no doubt of interest to members of this committee. An important thing to note is that whilst we've set out the key themes raised in the consultation in this report, we will be presenting how we respond to those comments in the report that we're taking to Strategy and Resources in August. That will come alongside a full consultation report, as well as a schedule of suggested amendments that we would like to offer for submission alongside the plan when we submit to government in September. I realise that was a bit of a speedy run through. I'm hoping that you've all managed to digest at least some of the report and hear some of the themes that we're raising today. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, for that report. Do I see any members wishing to make a contribution? I do. Councillor Shaw, and I also see Councillor Sanger after that. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Laura, for the report. There's no mention of the objection to the restrictions on fast food takeaways included in the report. Indeed, there's only one mention of the word food in the thing. So, just wondering why that's been omitted.
Thank you. I can answer that. I think the main reason that it's been omitted is because what we've chosen to highlight here is the really heavy themes, as it were, ones that either received a lot of consultation response or received responses from a really wide set of audiences. It doesn't mean that there were a lot of other comments. I'd say there's just under 2,000 individual comments. So all of those will be set out in the consultation report that goes to Strategy and Resources alongside how we're going to respond to all of those. So hot food takeaways, yes, I take your point. That was something that we received comments on, but it wasn't sort of perhaps numerically as strong a set of comments as some of the issues that I've just identified there.
If I may, Chair, I mean, it's just that it was raised at full council and in other places, so I would have thought that might have been highlighted.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Laura, is there anything that you'd like to come back on?
I don't think so. Apologies if we've not picked up that issue. That was, I do recall to it. It was raised at the Strategy and Resources Committee and the full council, and perhaps that's something we've overlooked in not reflecting that in this report. But we're trying to stick to really the key themes of the responses that we received.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My apologies, I can't recall whether it was Councillor Sanger or Auckland who wanted to speak. Councillor Sanger.
Thank you, Chair. And it's good that we're going through the process. I mean, the quicker, it's really important to get an updated local plan. I mean, I am one of only half a dozen councillors who were here when the UDP was adopted, so the city needs a local plan so desperately, so many of the policies do need updating. And it's really important that in the new, that we listen to public, the public views, and I do hope Strategy and Resources do take cognizance of the size of the petitions coming in about the proposed travel industrial site at Eckington Way. So I look forward to the debate at Strategy and Resources on that. Just in terms of local green spaces, I mean, and clearly that's something which we as members didn't spend that long talking about, changing this designation. And clearly in section 1.4.31, I mean, you've identified a number of sites. I think many of us are keen to follow that through, even if it's not part of this process in terms of a codicil or what have you, or in terms of the next stage, because these are all sites that we would want to see extra protection. And I noticed Holland Buskin, Wood Lane, members cross-party agreed the amendment at full council, so I thought we'd already protected that site, but happy to give it extra protection, and I say whether that's through a codicil, and that's, I guess, something else that will happen at Strategy and Resources, but keen for Strategy and Resources to understand the various public and wider and development consultation in terms of the local plan. I'm very keen that we're able to get a new local plan on timetable. So thank you, Chair, and thank you to the officers for all the work on this, and it goes to Strategy and Resources next. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sanger. Laura, is there anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Councillor Sanger. Yes, actually, on the local green spaces issue, we were alerted to 7 potential additional local green spaces during the consultation. Just as a matter of clarification, not all of those came directly from community groups or with the same degree of evidence. And the reference to Holland Busk came from an organisation that they didn't actually specify which part of the area they were referring to, which without wanting to get too much into detail, leads us back to one of the issues with having these raised at this stage is that they aren't all fully formed evidenced proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I think it's also probably worth drawing the attention of the committee that I know that Clive Betts, the local MP, has been doing an awful lot of work on Hollings Busk and also invited me to go and visit residents at Eckington Way, which I did in order to listen to them as well. Am I right in saying that Councillor Diamond wished to speak? No, apologies. It's been a long meeting. Is there anyone else who wished to speak? I don't think so. Well, Laura, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
So, are we all agreed? If any member wishes to dissent, please raise your hand. No, that means that the report is approved unanimously, and thank you very much, Laura, for presenting it to us today. Now, thank you very much to everyone, officers and elected members for the meeting. It's very much appreciated, and that concludes the business for today. Thank you.